Welcome to This Explainer. Okay, today we're diving straight into the incredibly high-stakes reality of how a nation actually builds a machine to stop money laundering and terrorist financing. Egypt sits at this major global crossroads with a massive cash-intensive economy, which makes it a truly fascinating case study in how you take regulatory theory and turn it into real on-the-ground disruption.
So, to kick things off, let's ask ourselves a seriously crucial question. Does simply writing a law and checking a regulatory box actually stop criminals from moving dirty money? Well, it's a dilemma that plagues financial regulators all over the world, because having the rules on paper, that's really only half the battle. The true test of any anti-money laundering regime isn't just about adopting the necessary rules. It's about whether those rules actively result in better risk understanding, higher quality reporting, and ultimately, the actual recovery of criminal proceeds.
Let's jump right into Section 1, Egypt's new fin-crime strategy.
Take a look at this momentum. We're starting back in 2013 with the initial framework, and then moving to a critical baseline set by an international evaluation in 2021. But the real game changer here is the aggressive 2023 strategy launch. This wasn't just another policy announcement from the government. It was a highly deliberate move to convert international standards into an active, coordinated shield for the entire Egyptian economy against money laundering and proliferation financing risks.
Now, the absolute analytical heartbeat of this whole national strategy is Egypt's Financial Intelligence Unit. Established back in 2002, they're the ones receiving and analyzing suspicious transaction reports. But here's the thing, they can't execute this strategy in a vacuum. By working directly with a national coordinating committee, they're attempting to align high-level policy with on-the-ground operations. They serve as the central hub, literally trying to make sense of a massive, complex web of financial data.
Moving right along to Section 2, Networked Crimes and Shared Intelligence.
Because look, financial crime isn't just numbers on a screen, right? It is deeply tied to gritty, real-world predicate offenses. In Egypt, we aren't just talking about fraud. We're talking about the proceeds from drug trafficking, firearms offenses, and, uniquely to the region, antiquities trafficking. Criminals take the proceeds from these primary crimes and funnel them through various sectors and jurisdictions until they look entirely legitimate in the formal economy.
And that brings us to a massive, massive hurdle. No single authority sees the complete chain. Think about it. Banks only observe a customer's transaction behavior. Police and prosecutors hold the criminal intelligence. Registries might have the company ownership information. Because criminals constantly move proceeds across multiple borders and sectors, information so easily gets trapped inside individual banks or police departments. Honestly, unless a unified strategy pulls all those fragments together, investigators are basically trying to solve a giant puzzle in the dark. For regulators and compliance pros, breaking down these silos to create shared, actionable intelligence is absolutely crucial.
Which leads us perfectly into Section 3, From Rules to Reality.
Okay, this right here is the ultimate test for literally any nation. On one side, you have technical compliance, measuring whether your laws actually reflect international standards. That's building the machine. On the other side, you have effectiveness, asking if those laws actually produce real results, investigations, and convictions. Effectiveness is turning that machine on to actually catch criminals.
When we look at Egypt's 2021 baseline evaluation on effectiveness, you can see exactly what this gap looks like in practice. Out of 11 immediate outcomes they measured, Egypt scored substantial on 4, moderate on 6, and low on just 1. The legal foundation existed, for sure. The technical compliance was largely there. But there was a serious implementation gap. The real-world results were decidedly moderate. The rulebook was strong, no doubt, but the enforcement outcomes desperately needed to catch up.
But fast forward to today, and I mean, Egypt definitely hasn't been sitting still. They achieved some really significant regulatory upgrades all the way through 2024, improving standards that cover money transfer services and new technologies. And looking at 2025, they even upgraded their money laundering offense standards to be largely compliant with international recommendations. Yet despite all this progress, they remain in enhanced follow-up. Why? Because the clock is always ticking on operational reality. A stronger rulebook just doesn't automatically mean stronger convictions. The rules urgently have to translate into action.
Let's shift gears to Section 4, beyond just the banks. Banks are usually the most mature, heavily fortified part of an anti-money laundering framework. But criminal proceeds absolutely do not just stay inside banks. Criminal networks are highly adaptable. They are eagerly exploiting everyday channels to layer and conceal their illicit value. We're talking real estate, professional legal services, precious commodities, and increasingly mobile wallets and instant digital payments. Digital transformation is a true double-edged sword here. It brings incredible financial inclusion, which is great, but if identity and monitoring controls are weak, it simultaneously accelerates the sheer velocity of illicit payments.
To pierce through all these diverse sectors, authorities have to tackle what I like to call the ultimate boss-level challenge: beneficial ownership. It is not enough to just know the name of a company registered on some document. Authorities must identify the beneficial owner. We're talking about the actual, living, breathing human pulling the strings behind the layered shell companies, the nominee directors, and the complex cross-border structures. If ownership information isn't actively verified, these corporate layers will successfully separate a crime from its proceeds. Simply put, if you don't know who truly owns the asset, there's no way you can freeze it.
And finally, Section 5, the ultimate goal: confiscation.
So how do you stop those assets from just vanishing across borders? Well, authorities use this brilliant tactic called a parallel financial investigation. Here's how it actually unfolds on the ground. First, you don't just investigate the drug trafficking or the antiquities theft. No. Step 2 is that at the exact same time, you are simultaneously tracing the connected financial proceeds. And Step 3, this immediate dual action allows you to expose the wider network and freeze the funds before they can be moved or layered. If investigators wait for the primary criminal case to finish before they start looking for the money, those funds will be long gone. You literally have to follow the money from the very outset.
Because at the end of the day, it really all boils down to this one foundational truth. The credibility of an AML regime depends on whether crime becomes less profitable. An anti-money laundering strategy completely fails if the financial benefit remains intact. Think about it. Convicting a low-level smuggler means absolutely nothing to an organized crime syndicate if the millions of dollars they made remain safely tucked away in their accounts. You have to actively separate the criminal from their cash before it can be reinvested in further crime or terrorism. Which leaves us with this final kind of provocative thought. As Egypt transitions from strategy to enforcement, really attempting to turn those policies into real-world asset recovery and coordinated investigations, will the architecture of shared intelligence finally outsmart the agility of modern financial criminals? Or are the criminals always going to be one step ahead of the rulebook? The strategy is in place. The architecture is built. Now, it all comes down to execution. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.